Welcome back to the Death Valley Insider YouTube page. I'm your host, Kenny Van Doren. Today, we have another special guest from the national side, but also the Alabama side, Brandon Howard, who is a recruiting writer for Tide Illustrated on the Rivals Network. Recently got a promotion on the Rivals Network as a national recruiting analyst. We wanted to have Brandon on here, get some more familiarity around the Alabama side, and just with Brandon, because he's going to be all around the South and the SEC, providing updates. And we just wanted to find some Alabama ties, some LSU ties. He has some information, some stuff that he can help us out with. And so right there, just Brandon, we want to welcome you and congrats on your new position.
I appreciate it. Definitely an honor, a blessing. Thank the Lord for it. So, yeah, it's exciting times. I think right now, we're kind of looking at that eval season. We obviously saw some rankings come out. We'll see a string of rankings continue to come out, and myself excited to be in the position that was given to me by Rivals to be more influential in the South. And I hope that we have more conversations like this because, whether it's Alabama or, from a national side, what I'll be covering, there will be a lot of thin threads. So a lot that we can work on together.
For sure. And I mean, this is a perfect time for this promotion to happen because of all the changes that came on the Alabama side. Nick Saban announced his retirement. Kalen DeBoer steps in at Washington or from Washington. What have you just kind of seen on the recruiting front for the Tide? I know there's a lot for you to talk about, and you've been very busy the last 2 weeks. But what changes have you seen on the recruiting front?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I'd say, when I took the position, 2 years ago, I didn't think I didn't necessarily know I'd see the end of the Saban era, but it was obviously up in the air, right? You thought it could happen, within probably 3 years, maybe after next year more so than when it happened. When it happened, when Saban stepped down, and you think about that moment, and I think about that time frame, and there's just a lot that goes into it, and to be able to cover that is just truly a blessing in many regards. Good.
Yeah, and just on that recruiting front, I mean, with his retirement, I mean, you've seen so many guys jump into the portal, decommit. I mean, it feels like for a long time they weren't just committing to Saban, they were just committing to this Alabama brand. Do you think Alabama can still hold that brand and hold that title for years to come?
Yeah, I mean, it's been an exciting time. I mean, obviously, Coach Saban has done a tremendous amount for college football. The Alabama, the respect that he's given that program and the players he's been able to get over the years. You can't look past that. Coach DeBoer, he's going to bring in a new style. I definitely feel like there will be a little bit more offensive flavor with Alabama moving forward. Not to say that like under Coach Saban that they were limited by any capacity. First, it was more of a run to pass, type offense. But, over the years, it definitely became more progressive. But, now I think it's going to be a little more high flying. We saw that at Washington. And he has a history of putting up numbers offensively. And so, the progression just in that regard with things just being more offensive heavy across the board football wise, really people want to see points scored. And the new era of college football, points are going to be at a premium. And so you just think about those things and you go, okay, there's some hope here. And then, for Ryan Williams to stay put, and we'll probably talk about that a little bit more later, but that kind of speaks volumes to, his capacity as a recruiter, his understanding of people. I've heard nothing but good things about his composure, demeanor, and kind of level of expectation having taken over for the GOAT, Coach Saban.
That's where I want to go from there, talking about that the flavor and getting a lot of these high power offensive guys to stay, especially in a coaching change. For Ryan Williams, I mean, what kind of played into his decision to decommit and then come right back to the Tigers or to the Tide?
I mean, you definitely have to take into account, Coach Saban retires. That's going to affect you. If you're Ryan Williams, you kind of left the door open just for any changes. And, with Auburn pushing, seemed like Texas was coming on late. Texas A&M involved, several schools who were kind of trying to push for him. He's the type of player where, if you get his ear and he listens, he can change your program, as we've seen, with the amount of awards he's been able to receive over the years and the plays he's been able to make. But ultimately, I talked to him the other day at the award ceremony before he actually won Mr. Football for the second time in a row. And first time in 42 years that's ever happened. Crazy to think about. That's the year we're in, where Coach Saban retires and Ryan Williams makes history. Crazy world. But when I talked to him, he just he kind of like we were talking, and it was him, Anquan Fagans, and Perry Thompson. What a bunch, right? Like potentially all NFL players. And he said, and they were talking about like kind of the rankings and a couple other things. But then Ryan said, "Boy, you better go with what you know." And that kind of stuck out to me. I was like, hey, he understands that at the end of the day, the value of that the brand Alabama still is strong. And it's going to have to prove that it's not strong before it's not strong. And the amount of players that are still on the team, and you think about some of the people who are going to come back, think about the 2024 class, a very motivated bunch, and just a lot of motivated people in that building. And you think about, kind of the new style of the playoff where it's 12 teams and it's a little bit more loose, so to speak, where, losses are not as much held against you as they were before. There's just a lot of openness. And as we've seen, kind of anything's possible type of situation.
And when he jumped in, to the not portal, but when he decommitted and he was kind of looking at some of these other options, LSU hit the table, never actually made it down to Baton Rouge for that final visit to look at him. In the back of your mind, did you kind of think, he was going to return to Alabama? It doesn't hurt to look around after the guy you committed to ends up retiring. But did you have a feeling that Alabama, he was just going to go right back to him?
I mean, I've had the opportunity to be around Williams several times, and definitely he knows how to give us what we want. And we definitely, and in many respects, he puts on a show on the football field, but then also, when it comes to doing interviews and being who we want him to be, which is Hollywood, he knows how to be Hollywood. And he retires on the day that Coach Saban retires. And he decommits. Ryan Williams decommitted the day that Nick Saban retired. And then 2 weeks later, he commits right back to Alabama. Just like all in the cards. And then he takes very few of the visits that he had planned anyway. So in many respects, was able to drive up his value. Why should he not play that? But then in other regards, it also created value to the Alabama recruiting class, because now as they reset, it really gives them a positive push that they were able to land a player of that caliber, heading into February, because it is a signing day. And it kind of pushes that momentum as we kind of see, it's looking like a rather large group that's going to be in Tuscaloosa this weekend. You start to see some of that momentum for, from 24 start to push in 25, and, things get quite interesting, for just even from the looks of it.
I kind of want to pivot here now, looking at some of the guys who ended up not coming back, entered the transfer portal or decommitted. There were two cornerbacks, one from the class of 2024, so never actually was on the team. I mean, was on the team, but never actually got to play for the Tide. Another one was a 2023, who had both of them had interest in LSU. And we'll start with Jameer Grimsley, who was a 2023 signee. Transfer portal opens, he goes out, looks at some schools and narrowed it down to more Florida and LSU. LSU didn't really seem like the choice. He's from Florida, went to play for the Gators. What can you kind of say about some of these guys that are staying within the SEC and really didn't have much behind them? They just kind of went right to another team.
I'd say with Grimsley, if we're going to start with him, and then you can, ask, I guess, you're excited again. But with Grimsley, Florida was kind of pushing late anyway, right? So, you just factor that in, and he had a lot of strong relationships there. I mean, speaking to some sources close to Grimsley, some would say that Florida was his dream school, but he couldn't turn down the opportunity to play for Bama, quote for quote, for Coach Saban. So, like many people, the opportunity to play for Coach Saban was something that you could not turn down. And whenever he retired, you have to just rethink some things, especially if you're in a position like him, where Florida is really wanting you. It is your dream school. And, they can present the opportunities that Florida puts players in the NFL year in and year out. And it's a program that has shown you that there's opportunities, because if they don't get it right this year, it may be a new staff in next year. That's just what it is. So, Grimsley's going to come in. I expect him to compete for early playing time. They have a the cornerbacks coach, and they just has with Corey Raymond making his leave. And so, Florida understands, they're in a position where, they need to have some success now. They have DJ Lagway and company. But, I think Jameer Grimsley can definitely be an impactful player.
And I'm glad you mentioned Corey Raymond there because that's where I wanted to go with Grimsley is that Corey Raymond is back in Baton Rouge now as a secondary coach, and he's been huge on the recruiting trail and only 2 or 3 weeks actually officially back on staff. And so I think that's where the LSU interest probably was drawn as well, and there's, I mean, a lot of history with defensive backs. Just quick thing on Desmond Ricks, we know there was not the best relationships there at the end of his recruitment back in 2023 when he signed with Alabama. Looked like LSU was a lock there for a little bit. But he's staying within the SEC as well, going to Texas A&M. We don't really have to touch on too much about the past, but what about the future for him? Did he kind of have the freshman season that people are expecting, and what can he kind of do when he gets to Texas A&M and stays in the SEC?
I mean, I definitely think Des Ricks is an impactful player. At many points in the recruitment process, he was deemed as the number one recruit in the country. And you look at that and you see the length that he provides as a DB, and you see his ball skills. I think he can definitely be, a high caliber player, especially with his background from originally being from Virginia, I believe, and there's a toughness that comes from that area. Especially before he transferred to IMG and then really kind of toned in on his skill sets. But in Alabama, although he didn't see the field, I don't quite know if it was expectation for him to get immediate playing time because he did kind of sign in that later batch. And on top of that, you have a Caleb Downs over the top. I mean, you just kind of see his demeanor, and you understand you have to kind of have that demeanor to be a first year starter for Alabama, and with Kool-Aid, and then with just company who especially with two transfers coming in, Jalen Key and company, it was going to be a tough spot for any freshman to break that starting unit. Although two did, it was still going to be very tough. And that's one thing that I think is going to have Alabama um, very excited for next year, just because most of the people from that class that kind of had in many respects like was one of the best that Coach Saban had ever assembled with that 23 group. Most of those players did not even see the field. So Quay Rusaw, James Smith and company, you get to see these guys break out, and those are big time players who were in that group right there.
One more domino effect of Nick Saban's retirement, just the staff changes, is on the 2025 front, which was kind of even crazier to think that he was getting into. I mean, 2026 and 2027 as well. But four-star wide receiver Jamie French, who at the National Combine put on a show, I think everyone agreed he was the best talented. He was the most talented wide receiver out on the field. He decommitted from Alabama through all of the motion, all of the noise that was happening. What can you kind of where do you see his recruitment going? I know LSU fans have kind of, looked at his name recently. I know a lot of Power 5 schools are still in on him. Where do you see him going from here?
I think things are wide open. I expect most likely at some point a return visit to Alabama. He'll entertain it because he can still be the guy in this class. And him and Williams have a good relationship, despite at one point thinking that him, George McIntyre, and Sanders were going to be like the trifecta. Things still work out in Alabama's favor typically, and I don't necessarily expect that drop, if there were to be one, to happen tomorrow. But the world is a crazy place. Yeah, I mean, so I think Jay French is wide open. I think you're going to see him take visits, and at the end of the day, I think you're.
One last thing, just for the on the SEC front before we wrap things up. It's hard not to notice what LSU is doing with the recruiting class. From what you've been talking about, I mean, are other kids around the Alabama area, Mississippi, Georgia, just kind of taking notice of what LSU is putting together on the 2025 front?
I would definitely say they are. Recruits can be highly influenced just by how you performed last year and some of the accolades that your players were able to garner. And I definitely say that the accomplishments that the team had last year still has things looking very it, just moving forward. And so recruits are they're ready, and some guys are still ready to break out, and there's some guys who are just kind of silently around these programs where if the team pushes it the right way, that they're going to, pull the trigger. So I think we're due for a very exciting recruitment season, and I think things are honestly just getting started, especially with kind of some staff changes still to be out there.
Well, Brandon, we thank you so much for joining us today on the Death Valley Insider YouTube page. For those that are trying to find us on social media, we are at LSU Rivals, but I'd like Brandon to let everyone know where they can find him on social media and also on rivals.com and at Tide Illustrated.
Yeah, well, if you're trying to find me on Twitter, it's capital B, capital H, lowercase OWARD _11. That's B Howard _11. And if you're trying to find me on Instagram, it's Brandon _Howard 11. There's some fun stuff going on that Instagram. I'll tell you that right there. If you're following anything, you should follow the Instagram. But the Twitter has a lot of informative, newsworthy items as well.
For sure. And all that information will be in the description as well. So you guys can keep up with what Brandon is doing, especially on the national front as he gets deeper into the SEC and into the South of the recruiting for the classes of 2025 and beyond. So we thank you guys again. And we thank Brandon for joining us today. Hopefully we'll have him back on, talk all SEC recruiting and especially the Tigers as he learns a lot more about what's going on that maybe we aren't hearing or aren't seeing. Brandon, thank you again.
Okay. Thank you for having me. And it's truly, truly an honor.